Everybody. Again, as I said at the beginning, today our Torah portion is dedicated to the memory of my dear friend David Schwartz, Zichrono Livracha, who died al Kiddush Hashem fighting for Am Yisrael, was killed in Gaza. David was a very big impact on my life, felt very close to him, and actually on the day of the funeral, right after the Shiva, the family was at their home. David's wife, Meital, asked me if I could write a Torah in his memory. David and I had written a page of the Torah together. So once she asked me that, I realized that was something that should be prioritized. And I had the fortune, because I felt David was helping me write it. I had the fortune not only to write one Torah, complete a Torah for him this year, but now, God willing, tomorrow I'm going to complete a third Torah this year. So this year I will have written really all of them in David's memory, 3 Sifrei Torah, because I felt that he gave his life for Am Yisrael. So we all have to be using our time only for sacred activities, or as much as possible. So I want to talk about today in our
Koach, Rabbi.
Thank you. It's Yasher Koach. It's for the Chayalim and all those who give their life for Am Yisrael. And I feel fortunate to be able to do something small for me in his memory. I appreciate the good wishes. This week's portion, I love so much when there's this nexus of the parsha and the daf yomi. And this week's portion has that nexus where all of our learning, all of our Torah study comes together. And I'm going to, this week, tomorrow's daf is the daf that talks about the mitzvah of what's called Kiddush Levana. Kiddush Levana is, some mitzvahs have mazel and they have luck, and other mitzvahs don't have mazel. One of the mitzvahs that doesn't have too much mazel is the mitzvah of Kiddush Levana, sanctification of the new moon. And I'm going to talk about that with everybody. But first, we'll talk about the first mitzvah that was given to the Jewish people. We'll read the Rashi on it, and then we'll go to our Talmudic text, and we'll look at what the Talmud says about what our job is to do with the new moon. And then after we do that, we have time, we'll look at Rabbi Soloveitchik and also some of the Hasidic commentary on this powerful, important mitzvah, obviously. So this is the first mitzvah given to the Jewish people, is the mitzvah of sanctifying the new moon. It says in this week's portion, chapter 12, and we read this paragraph twice a year. We read it this Shabbos, and we also read it on what's called Parshas HaChodesh, one of the 4 parashas of the Torah. Chapter 12, verse 1, God says to Moshe and Aaron in the land of Egypt, HaChodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodeshim. This month shall be for you the head of all months. Rishon hu lachem. This is the first for you. L'chodshei Hashanah. So what is going on here? This is the first for you of the months of the year. Of all the mitzvahs to make the first mitzvah, why is it the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh? And what is our responsibility as we come to this mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh? And what is Kiddush Levana? So Rashi says that God showed Moses the moon in its renewal. It says, HaChodesh hazeh, Hereheu Levana b'chidusha. He showed the moon to Moshe in its renewal, meaning to say the moon, of course, we know today, actually never changes its size, but our vision of the moon, the way we see the moon, changes from our perspective, and it appears to us that the moon has disappeared, and now it's reappearing. And so when it first started to reappear, God showed that to Moses. God showed that to Moses. He says, when the moon becomes new again, that's the beginning of the month for you. And this is the simple meaning of the verse, and it cannot depart from its simple meaning. And what does that mean? Rashi says this was referring to the month of Nisan. The month of Nisan will be the first of all the months. Here it's called Rishon, not called Nisan, but this is the first mitzvah. And Rashi continues, this month shall be for you. Why does it say this month? Nitkashem Moshe al Moad HaLevana. Moshe was perplexed about the precise determination of the reappearance of the moon. And he didn't know what size it has to be in order to sanctify it. So God showed him with a finger, so to speak, the moon in the sky. And he said to him, see like this and sanctify it. And then Rashi asks a technical question. How could God have shown him the moon at night? But God only spoke to him during the day. So how could he have shown him the moon at night? It says it was on the day that Hashem spoke, on the day of his commanding, from the day that God commanded onward, meaning to say Moses got it, unlike all the other prophets who got their prophecy in a dream or at night, Moshe got his vision during the day. So how was he able to see the moon? He showed it to him close to sunset. That's when this passage was told him. And he showed the reappearing moon to Moses with the approaching of darkness. So this is the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh. I want to pause for a second and ask, I want to stop the recording for one moment and ask people, what does the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh mean to you? Why is this the first of all the commandments? What is the reasoning, or what is the significance or the symbolism of this mitzvah? So I want to turn, because the Talmud discusses the special blessing over the new moon that we call Kiddush Levana. The Talmud discusses it really in one place in the Talmud, and that's tomorrow's Daf Yomi. Now, this is called the Birkat HaLevana, the blessing over the moon, which should not be confused with the Kiddush or Mekadshenes HaChodesh, where you sanctify the new moon. The court is obligated, the Beis Din was obligated to do what's called Kiddush HaChodesh, to declare a new moon. And that is that the court had to go through a process of two witnesses would come and say, we saw the moon, and the court would interrogate them and discover that if they were correct and say, we declare it's the next month. That was the original way in which a new month took place. Then it became time where it became too complicated, and they saw that the central court system was breaking down. So a sage named Hillel, not Hillel the elder, but his descendant, established the calendar for the next several thousand years, and that's what we're basing ourselves on. But there is a mitzvah called Kiddush Levana, or Birkat HaLevana, which is a blessing that we recite over the moon. And that's a blessing we'll see if it's an obligation for women, but it's certainly a blessing that men are supposed to recite. And the typical custom is to try to recite it on at the conclusion of Shabbat, right? When everyone's tired, they've had a long Shabbat, and they're ready to rush home, we say, don't go anywhere. First, we're going to recite the Kiddush HaLevana, the sanctification of the moon, the blessing of the moon, and we'll see here what the source for this is. I'm going to read from the Talmud. So the Talmud, as it typically does, begins in medias res, as we say in the Latin, in the middle of things. Without telling us why you need to make a blessing on the moon, the Talmud says, at what point in the month do you make the blessing on the moon? And the Talmud's first answer is the answer that Rav Acha Bar Chanina says in the name of Rav Asi, in the name of Rav Yochanan, until the cavity of the moon is full, meaning only once the moon, you can recite the blessing of the month only until the point where the cavity of the moon is full. And that's usually understood to mean, as the Talmud is going to tell us exactly how many days that is, but that's going to be until, Talmud is going to say, according to that opinion, it's going to be the 16th day of the month. So the reason is, Rashi says, because since the blessing of Kiddush Levana, the blessing actually states, blessed are you, God, who renews the month. So once the cavity of the moon is full, obviously we know there's no cavity in the moon. We're talking about the appearance to the eye. Once the cavity is full, you can't talk about the renewal of the month. And so therefore, we have to wait only until it's full can we recite the blessing. There is a big discussion amongst the commentaries, which is not directly in the Talmud, which talks about at what point in the month can you start to recite it. Generally speaking, we say after the third night that you could start to recite it, because you have to have a little bit of the appearance of the moon to see a cavity. But that's generally speaking a dispute. At what point? Some say only from the seventh. Okay, so that's a discussion. So the Talmud says that's the first opinion. You can recite the blessing of the moon until the 16th, until the cavity is full. And how much is that? So they said, so how much is that? Until 7 days. One opinion is until the seventh day of the month, and the other opinion is until the 16th day of the month. So there's two opinions in the Talmud. One opinion is you can recite this blessing until the seventh day of the month, and the other opinion is you can recite until the 16th day of the month. That's the typical way in which the Talmudic text is read. Some read this as a minority reading, read it as from this, that you can only recite it from the 7th till the 16th. But a typical way is that there's a dispute. Can you recite it until the 7th day or until the 16th day? Hold on, I want to pause for a moment. So there's a dispute here. Is it till the 7th or until the 16th day of the month? And both opinions, both the opinion of Rav Yehuda, who says until 7, and Nardai, who says till 16, they both hold like Rabbi Yochanan, that the blessing can only be said until the cavity is full. But they're arguing about what is considered the fullness of the cavity. So according to the opinion of Rav Yehuda, who says it's till day 7, that means to say when it's half full, like a bow filled up to its bowstring. That's what the Talmud says. He says, Mahave ki yisra, like when it's like a half, like when it's half full, like a bow filled up to its bowstring. And then our Ardayans, who say until day 16, they say that's until the moon is completely full, like a sieve. So that's the initial explanation. Of course, if we were studying the Talmud in depth, we would say, well, isn't it full on the 14th already? And so fine. So they discuss that. Then the Talmud says, Rav Achamidifta says to Ravina, we have another question. We still haven't got to the basic question. What exactly is this blessing? Before we even get to that question, they said, well, why don't we recite the blessing over the moon even after the cavity is full? Even after the moon's cavity is full, we should be able to recite this blessing of the blessing of called Hatov V'Hametiv. The Tov V'Hametiv is a blessing called the good and one who does. The blessed are you, Hashem, our God, who is good and who does good. And that's blessing is recited when we hear about something that benefits both ourselves and others. And so this is a blessing that we should be able to recite, because even though we're not making the blessing on the moon directly, we should require this blessing because the increasing reflection of light from the moon onto earth is good. Meaning to say, even according to one Rav Yehuda says only until day 7, we should be able to recite the blessing all the way on through day 16 until 16, because the moon keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So we should be able to write. We should be able to make a blessing on the fact that there's more light in the world. So he said. So the answer to that question said, well, no, we're not going to do that. Why? Because when the moon is missing, when it's smaller, we don't make the blessing of Dayan HaEmet, which is blessed is the true judge. So a Dayan HaEmet is typically said, Rahman al at a levaya, at a funeral. You make the blessing, blessed are you God who is the true judge. So it's at a bad news. Bad news. When you hear bad news, you make the blessing. We don't say that when the moon is smaller. So we're not going to say the blessing for the good and the one who does good in this case. Typically, the good and the one who does good is typically recited either on the birth of a child or else when you bring out a second bottle of wine to the table. And Talmud says, why don't you say both? So that's a Talmud's question. And the Talmud says, well, no, since it is the typical way, that's the way of the world, we don't make this blessing. Because if that's the normal way of the world, we shouldn't see this as a symbol of good or bad. We don't look at the moon as a symbol of good or bad. And I think the Talmud is setting up the idea, what are the reasons we are not making the blessing? Meaning, say, the reasons we are making the blessing, first we want to rule out what is not a reason we're making the blessing. And one reason that we're not, I don't know, I keep mixing this up. The reason for the blessing is not because the moon's growth or failure or diminishing is a sign of blessings or bad news. That's not the reason for the blessing. Because since it always comes, that's not the reason for the blessing. So therefore, the Talmud now says, okay, what is this blessing? What is this blessing? And I know not everybody here comes to daven with us in the yeshiva. So if you ever find yourself on a Saturday night in a different congregation, you should encourage them to recite this blessing. If it's before the 16th day of the month and the moon is visible, you should encourage this blessing to be recited. Okay, I see Rabbi Yosef has a question. Okay, so what is the text of the actual blessing that's recited? So the text is as follows. So Rav Acha says to Rav Ashi, in the West, i.e. in the land of Israel, because they're talking in Babylon, what is the blessing that they say? They say the following. They say the following. Hold on, I lost my place here. Oh, excuse me. Before we get to the text of the actual blessing, we're not yet up to the text of the actual blessing yet. I'm going through the Gemara. Before we get to the text of the actual blessing, we have a statement about the importance of reciting the blessing. And then we're going to get to the text of the actual blessing. So first it says, Rav Acha bar Chanina, in the name of Rasi, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, whoever makes the blessing on the new moon, the blessing on the moon in its proper time, meaning to say before its cavity is filled, that or either halfway according to Rabbi Yehuda or the full way according to the Naradians, it's as though you have greeted the face of the divine. I don't know that we say that about any other mitzvah out there. And you can recite this blessing even by yourself. You don't need a minyan to recite it. You don't need a quorum. You are supposed to ideally go outside, but you do not need a minyan. So we'll see why you're supposed to go outside. He says, to whoever recites this blessing, it is as though you are reading the face of the divine presence, because it says about the new moon, HaChodesh Hazeh, this month shall be for you a Rosh Chodesh, and it also says Zeh Keli V'Amveyu. By the splitting of the sea, it says the word Zeh, this is my God, and I will glorify him. And the rabbis compared the two words Zeh to tell us that since they saw the divine presence at the splitting of the sea, so too when you make the blessing over the new moon, it's as though you are greeting the face of God. So the commentaries discuss what really does the blessing of the new moon have to do with greeting the face of God. It seems like it's an esoteric thing. Probably many people in this year haven't done this mitzvah yet. So what's the big deal? Why is that of such importance that it's like you're greeting the face of God? So one explanation is from Rabbeinu Yonah, the medieval commentary, Rabbeinu Jonah of Gerona. He says in his commentary to Brachos that yes, God is not visible to man. However, God reveals himself only through his greatness in the world. And so when we make the blessing on the new month, it's like it's a form of a surrogate of recognizing God's greatness. That's it. That's a way of we can recognize God's greatness in the world. We take a pause to recognize God's greatness. The Maharsha who's 15th century. We were at his synagogue in Ukraine. It was destroyed in the war now, and we were at his synagogue. And Marsha says that it's true that when we're in exile, we're very distant from the divine presence and we don't merit to see God's face. However, this blessing of the new moon is a symbol, it's symbolic for the Jewish people that just like the new moon becomes renewed, so too in the future, the Jewish people will be renewed and we will be redeemed from our exile. And then we will be able, once we are in a redeemed state, we will be able to see the face of God. And so therefore, when we make the blessing on the new moon, we are, in its proper time, we are basically reminding ourselves that we will once again be able to be redeemed and to greet the face of God. And so that's why it's considered like you are seeing the face of God. And so the Talmud then continues, and the Talmud says that the Tana Debeir Ishmael taught, if the Jewish people only merited to do this mitzvah, this is, I'll say the language, in Moed Zachol Yisrael, were it just a merit for us to greet the face of God through the new moon once a month, that would be sufficient. Meaning to say that this mitzvah by itself is sufficient to remind us of God's majesty over the world, that we're accepting God's sovereignty over our lives just by doing this mitzvah. Therefore, says Abaye, therefore, we need to recite it standing. Amar Abaye Hilkoch Nimrinu Me'umud. We need to recite the new moon, this blessing over the new moon while standing. And Maremer or Marzutri, Mekatfi Umavarchi. Maremer and Marzutri were older already, and it was hard for them. And so what they would do was they would support each other with their shoulders and recite it while standing. Some say that what it means is that they went outside and they would go outside and support each other. And that's why there's a custom to recite this Kiddush Levana. One has to go outside. There are many unique aspects to the Kiddush Levana. One of them is that it has to be recited outside. What other bracha do we have to go outside to recite it? Also, when you recite this blessing, you're supposed to say to people around you, Shalom Aleichem, and the people respond, Aleichem Shalom. And this is all based upon this concept here that they would go outside and try to do it together. And now we finally come in the Talmud's words to the blessing itself, the text of the blessing. And this blessing, exactly, almost word for word, exactly the way it appears in the Talmud, appears in our Sidurim to this day. And this is the blessing. So says Rav Acha to Rav Ashai. Okay, wait. First of all, I'm going to warn you that there's a non-egalitarian statement coming up. So if I offend you, apologize. I'm just reading the text of the Talmud. You'll have to decide to filter it out to the extent that you desire. Says Rav Acha to Rav Ashi. In the West, they would make the blessing Baruch Mechadesh Chadashim, meaning in the land of Israel, they will make the blessing on the new moon. Blessed is the one who renews the months. What a beautiful blessing. Blessed is the one who renews the months. So it says Rav Ashi to Rav Acha. So Rav Ashi was the last generation of the Babylonian Talmud. He's the one who, according to Gemara and Bava Basra, he edited the whole Talmud. So somebody quoted him and said, this is what they're saying in Israel. So Rav Ashi said, hi, this blessing is too short. He's too short. Nashi didan nami mivarchi. Our women can make this blessing. Meaning to say, yeah, it's not possible that this is the whole blessing, because we have women who are not educated and they themselves could recite this blessing. It's too short. And so therefore he says, what's the proper blessing? The proper blessing is like Rav Yehuda taught. This is the blessing. This is the blessing. I'll read this blessing for you. Baruch Asher b'mamaro barash lakim. Blessed is the one who with his utterance created the heavens, uveruach piv kol tzivam, and with the breath of his mouth all of their regions, meaning to say, blessed is the one who created the heavens and all the celestial being. God created the universe. Forgot who Charlotte said. Let's go back to creation, and God created the universe with 10 utterances, according to Pirkei Avot. And so the heaven and all of his bodies were created with God's word. So that's what it is. Blessed are is the one who with his words created this shechakim, the heavens. The word shechakim here means heavens, because it says mi saper shechakim bechachma, and with his words created all the hosts. Laws and time he gave to them so as not to change their task. Meaning, say God established the rules of nature, and that they're not allowed to change their task. They have to continue to go in according to their plan. These heavenly beings are rejoicing to do the will of their creator and fulfill their responsibilities with joy. They work, they are true workers, they're workers of truth. They're workers of truth whose work is truth. Rashi says they never change their orbit. Some say that it means whose work is truth refers to God, but this is the idea that they do the same thing. They have a task and they do it. And Levana Amar, to the moon, God said, Shetischadesh. The moon, unlike the other heavenly creatures like the sun, the moon is given this task of renewing itself. Shetischadesh. God told the moon to renew itself. Ateres tiferes lamusevaten. It's a crown of splendor for those born by him from the womb. Shehin atidin lischadesh. And this is the idea that the renewal of the moon is a crown of splendor, meaning to say it's a sign that the Jews also will be restored to their former grandeur, and they will eventually be restored. Jews are called born by God from the womb in Isaiah. So the Jews will be renewed in the future. So the Talmud is reading this on a national level, that the Jews we have been in exile, but we will be renewed as a nation. We will be renewed as a nation. And we should read it also on an individual level, that we go out to the new moon and we take notice of it and say, we will be renewed as individuals. If we have been having a setback, we will be renewed. We will be renewed. And it says, Shehin atidin leschadesh kamosa, that we will be renewed just like the new moon is renewed. Just like the new moon is renewed, and to glorify their maker for the name of his glorious kingdom. Baruch atah Hashem mikadesh chadashim. Blessed are you, Hashem, who renews the month. Based on this, also, there's a whole question whether or not women should recite the Kiddush Levana or not, whether or not women are supposed to recite the blessing. I think it became, this just means sociologically speaking, I think since the custom became to recite it, you're supposed to recite it since we're greeting the face of God, it became a custom to recite it when you're wearing your special Shabbos clothes. And so therefore the practice became typically speaking to recite on Saturday night while we're still wearing our Shabbos garments. And since women typically, historically, did not go to synagogues on Saturday nights, they probably skipped this blessing for that reason. But then there's a whole discussion, since it says here in the text that women also make the blessing. Maybe women are supposed to make the blessing. The Ramah says specifically in the Shulchan Aruch, women should not make the blessing. And that was what the Ramah said based upon this discussion here. The other idea that comes up is that there's a practice not to actually look at the moon when you recite the blessing. There's some evidence that since this was a blessing we recited outside, there was concern that this would arouse the enmity of the nations of the world who would be making fun of us. So we glance at the moon, but when we recite the blessing, we're not supposed to stare at the moon. So to make clear, we're not worshiping the moon. And also, why do we recite? At the end of reciting this, there's only two rituals where at the end of them we recite Aleinu. Does anybody know the two rituals where at the end of them we recite the Aleinu prayer? Anybody know this is one? Who knows what the other ritual where at the end we recite the Aleinu? Okay, it's the bris. After a circumcision, it's the custom to recite the Aleinu prayer. And why do we recite it here? Because we are saying that we are not worshiping the moon, we're worshiping God. Aleinu Ishabeh, we're worshiping God. And so therefore, this is the discussion in the Talmud of this idea of the Kiddush Levana, of the blessing over the new moon. No, Nancy, I don't think that's the relationship, but I appreciate that question. Nancy asked me a question. If you want to know the exact question, you can turn to Nancy. Some things are totally fine to ask, but I just don't feel like it's my place to discuss it. Anyway, so in that context, I wanted to say I always love what Rabbi Soloveitchik says about Rosh Chodesh. So I want to turn to what he says here in his commentary. We haven't gone to Rabbi Soloveitchik in a while. And so here we say, what does Rabbi Soloveitchik say right here? I want to pull it up. Here he says, he talks about this. He says the following. He says about the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh, he says something so beautiful. He says, this month shall be to you the head of the months. About the mitzvah of sanctifying the moon. This could be a reminder for us to think about when we do the mitzvah of Kiddush Levana. It says the first commandment the Jewish people were given in Egypt, which signaled the beginning of their liberation, was to mark time. This goes back to what Yafa pointed out. A slave has no time-bound commandments because the slave lacks the experience of time. To the slave, time is a curse. He's just waiting for the days to pass. The slave's time is the property of his master. No matter how hard he tries to be productive in time, he will not reap the harvest of his work. So the slave is insensitive to time. His sense of movement of time, the hours, days, weeks, is dull. Life to the slave personality is motionless. He has no excitement knocking at the door, nothing waiting, no hope for the future. Any faith which is inseparably bound up with time is not applicable to him. He says, Rabbi Soloveitchik says, the time awareness or experience has three components. One, retrospection, memory. Without memory, there is no time. Second, exploration or examination of the future, the things that are not yet born, the anticipatory experience of events in the future. And third, appreciation of the present moment as one's most precious possession. But basically, there are three things about time awareness. One, appreciation of the past. Two, anticipating a better future. And three, appreciation of the present as the most precious possession. No one is worthy of time awareness if we don't have memory, if we don't have retrospection, if we are not able of recovering and reproducing past experiences. So this is the whole idea of the story of telling about the Exodus. The mitzvah of retelling the Exodus story means that we are reliving that event, and that these teachings that were taught in this experience in the past is informing our life in the present. That's the idea of appreciating the retrospective of time. This is what Rabbi Soloveitchik says. This is such a beautiful sentence. When I think of Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Yoshua, Maimonides, I'm not thinking about people who lived in antiquity or the Middle Ages. No, they are people who lived or a part and parcel of my eye awareness. On the other hand, to live in time and to feel its rhythm, you have to move from the memory of the past to the unreality of the future. You have to go from things and events that are no longer to that which will be real someday. To live in time means to be committed to a great past and to an unborn future. We can't just be stuck in the past. We have to have dreams of the future, of redeeming ourselves. And then there's the moral element, responsibility for emerging events, intervention in the historical process. So basically, man has to use his retrospective and his future anticipatory redemption to help us mold the present. That's what Rabbi Soloveitchik writes, and that's the idea. And so he writes here the following. The halacha, this is Rabbi Soloveitchik. I'm not going to say I'm the biggest fan of this in practice, but this is what he says. He says the halacha is extremely time conscious, finding the present moment so important. For instance, we're permitted to do work on a Friday afternoon until 1 minute before sunset, but we can't work 1 minute later. A person reads Shema at 9:05 and fulfills the mitzvah, but at 9:06, his performance is worthless. What did he miss? The same recitation, the same commitment, the same dedication, and he has not yet fulfilled, and yet he has not fulfilled the Shema. Time is of critical importance, not years or months, but seconds and split seconds. Basically, the idea is we have to count the seconds. That's what Rabbi Soloveitchik is saying is the power of the importance here of time. Count the seconds. Don't waste our time. Appreciate the moments. And life is slipping away. So we mark this with our daily awareness of the importance of being exacting with our time. And so this is what Rabbi Soloveitchik is saying, that this is why it's the first mitzvah, because the way we appreciate time, the way we use time, is the center of our life. Of whether we're going to be successful in our life as servants of God or not. So these are some of the ideas about the mitzvah of sanctifying the new moon, what we might want to think about, renewal, appreciating time. All of this is the mitzvah of the blessing on the new moon. I'm happy to take questions at this time. Please.